I want to start by citing my Adventist credentials here. Uh, my This is my family tree. My maternal grandfather, Hans Peter Graham, was a minister in the Atlantic Union Conference all his career, and he died in the pulpit of the Washington, New Hampshire church. Uh, but farther up the tree is Chandler B. Preston, who was a Millerite and was visited by Joseph Bates and persuaded to keep the Sabbath. So that's my great 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 grandfather. His father, Noah Preston, fought in the Connecticut militia in the Revolutionary War. Up another tree, Solomon Winnie uh, was wounded in the Second Battle of Bull Run and was hospitalized in Washington, D.C., discharged, returned to his farm in Ulster County, New York, and fathered 6 more children. If that Confederate bullet had gone a little bit differently, I would not be speaking to you today. So, and finally, John Rawl up another tree, another branch. My great 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 grandfather was a deserter in the War of 1812. He was in the Union Army, and he was caught. He was tried in a tribunal in Montpelier, Vermont, and sentenced to 6 months hard labor. So I have deserter DNA, which explains uh, this urge to sit near the back of the church close to an exit. Uh, we're talking about the Adventist mission movement here, uh, and it's very important to Adventism. It wasn't at first. It was only after about 1860, 1870s that they realized that there was an imperative to express the gospel to the whole world, not just to New England. Christ, and the theory was Christ can't come until we've reached all the people, every uh, ethnic group and every language group in every country. And for the North American people, mission service was defined as overseas. So for many years, the base of mission activity was the US, Europe, Australia, and South Africa. Everything else was mission field. And missionaries put in long terms, 5 to 7 years, and it was certainly a career enhancing experience. Every president of the General Conference in the last 100 years has to have mission experience. And it also reflected Western cultural imperialism and a sense of superiority. And so, as Lauren alluded to, there was a severe adjustment when the natives, perhaps I should say, indigenous folk, became better educated and wanted to take leadership positions. So, missionary activity is one of the cultural markers, one of the symbols of self identity for Adventism, and that's why we have Mission Spotlight in many Sabbath school programs. We certainly recognized missionaries from the very beginning. This is just a sample. Usually at the start of the calendar year, the review published a list of all the missionaries by month that went overseas, again, from generally the Anglo cultures. Now, how I'm going to speculate on the cause and effect of some of the behavior we observe. A very early core belief of Adventism was the imminence of the second coming, and that the world must be warned, as if we don't warn the world, souls will be lost. Along with that is the investigative judgment coming right out of the Millerite movement, and the notion that personal salvation is precarious. And we see that so much in even modern Adventism. And those two ideas are interrelated, and they lead to us concluding that souls will be lost if we don't warn them. Uh, in other words, God won't save unbelievers. Well, what does this say about God? The other major doctrine, of course, is the seventh day Sabbath and the notion of rigorous Sabbath keeping, where the failure to observe the seventh day Sabbath and keep it holy is sin and puts our salvation at risk. And this comes up in grassroots expression, particularly in obituaries, very often after 1860. Again, the concern that God won't save unbelievers. So correct Sabbath keeping for many people was a test of salvation in the judgment. So I could be wrong about this, but many missionaries' personal pilgrimage, upon learning the Adventist doctrines and growing in confidence that they are true, and feeling that other people need to know about them, and feel that other people need to believe and act on those doctrines, leads you to feel that if you don't tell them, they will be eternally lost. And therein the feeling that if you don't tell them, you will be eternally lost. So there's a great burden of guilt that certainly motivated some of the missionaries. We don't have a way of measuring that in any kind of survey, uh, since so many of them are gone. But the characteristics I see, which we should appreciate, are the missionaries being entrepreneurial, highly motivated, problem solvers, and committed and tenacious. So this is new. I only developed this idea in the last week. Levels of faith engagement and investment. A book member just may show up at church, may not. Not much investment or engagement in Adventism. But if you attend church regularly, you have a higher level of engagement. If you hold a church office, an even higher level. If the denomination is your career, and most of my circle of friends are career Adventists, an even higher level. But to take a foreign mission assignment involves a tremendous engagement and investment in your faith, and that is something that we recognize. That investment may or may not correlate with orthodoxy, but I know many returned missionaries whose orthodoxy has evolved over time. The word engagement, of course, has other meanings in other contexts, like active listening or situational awareness, or intuiting the impact of your expression. In other words, reading the room. A missionary can be invested, engaged, and clueless as to how they're coming across. We may discuss that in the Q&A. So another measure is your immersion in Adventism, and there's some tests for that. What percentage of your Christmas card list are Adventists? Did you attend a non-Adventist university? How much of your career is working outside of the institutional church? The vast majority of my career was outside of Adventism. To how many denominations, publications do you subscribe? And the converse, how many Greek and Roman gods can you name and describe? That didn't come from academy. That came from uh, education outside of Adventism. So some of the challenges for foreign missionaries is the travel, and I'll give a great example of that. Getting the inoculations and putting your health at risk, isolation from family and friends. Before you go, you need to source all your household necessities. and learning a new language. That is a particular issue. Raising and educating children in the mission field is a challenge. Obtaining emergency health care, being sensitive to local culture and customs, and knowing when to yield influence and or authority to the emerging indigenous leadership. Again, a topic that Lauren brought up. So missionaries had to be generalists. Typical family situation, the husband was a physician and medical director of a mission hospital. The wife, either director of nursing curriculum or director of clinical lab. That husband, being a male, also sat on uh, the mission executive committee, the equivalent of a conference, and maybe have been expected to preach from time to time. So lots of skills. And they both had to learn the language as they go. There was no preliminary language workshops back at Andrews. It just didn't exist in the beginning. There was the concept of a missionary volunteer society, ingraining in all the youth that they ultimately ought to be missionaries. And this was emerged in 1879. There was both missionary volunteer symbolism and junior missionary volunteer symbolism. And here's a bunch of JMVs and their leaders in Australia in 1942. So this became a very big part of the youth ministry of the church, even into college. Here are some a foreign mission band at Pacific Union College in 1952. And backing up into 1928, the Review and Herald published a missionary map of the world. And everyone was expected to buy this. This map should be hung in every Seventh-day Adventist church of the world. So really emphasizing a world view or a broader horizon of what the church ought to be doing. A great incentive to work harder, to pray longer, and to give more liberally that God's kingdom may come. Again, God is waiting for us to warn the world before the second coming. God won't come until the whole world is warned, and many people felt that any delay in Jesus' second coming is their fault for inaction. Lots of great iconography in the mission field. This one was from the Australian Record. I love the hat and suspenders and necktie. If it is humid, I'm not going to wear a necktie, but a lot of missionaries did. One notable life in mission service was Homer Salisbury. American citizen, born in Battle Creek. He started the first Adventist school in England and eventually was asked to be general superintendent for all the Adventist work in India. I have a copy of his passport application. I'll talk more about the rich resources of documents that are now available on the web. He's sailed on the SS Persia going from England back to India. It sailed out of Tilbury on the London or the Thames estuary, but he boarded the ship in Marseille, and it was sunk without warning on December 30, 1950 by a German U-boat. 334 lives were lost, somewhere off the coast of Crete. What is ironic is the captain of that U-boat survived World War I, survived World War II, and died a natural death in 1949. Referred to as Professor Salisbury. They weren't sure for a while if he was lost because survivors of shipwrecks may take a long time to get back to their home front, but Finally, a 6-word cable came back from India. Survivors interviewed, evidence conclusive, Salisbury lost. So there was a substantial memorial service held in Tacoma Park on January 22, 1916, and you can see the names of all the GC luminaries who participated in the service. And it is him who Salisbury Hall in Newbold College is named after, Homer Salisbury. So, as I said, the Review and Herald listed all the workers sent to the field. And just for example, in April 1921, 10 families just in that month went to the mission field. Just an example, Mr. and Mrs. Mackett from England to India. Well, that is probably Walter Mackett, my Western Civ teacher when I took Western Civ at La Sierra. Another citation here is, and it's Mr., it's not elder. That's interesting. Leo Hollowell uh, to Brazil, South America. I'll talk more about him. The missionary departures included in 1953 Mr. and Mrs. Leroy Benzinger and their daughter Carol from the state of Maine, leaving New York for Indonesia on the SS Steel Admiral. And this is the SS Steel Admiral. Again, the web is a wonderful resource. Here, I just found these 6 months ago in a box that my mother had saved, some photos of them on the ship in their New York departure. My grandfather, Pastor Graham, also saw them off. And I don't know why they're leaving the ship in this photo, but maybe they going to get something shoreside before they get back on the ship. The Steel Admiral has a less than stellar history of colliding with many other ships, and finally on its way to Penang, Malaysia, a collision with a water taxi in New York, where the skipper of the water taxi was killed. The ship was scrapped in Taiwan in 1973. But sending missionaries off was a big deal. And Marilyn Beach tells me about a Green Lake church in Seattle. The whole church went down to the dock. It was a Saturday sailing. You may remember that Friday sailings are not a good thing to do. And the entire church went down to the dock to see some missionaries off. And they sang this hymn, God be with you till we meet again. I won't sing it for you. I will spare you that misery. In 1988, the review made a distinction between regular missionary service, nationals returning, and volunteer service. Now there was emerging volunteer service, obviously not for 5 years, for much shorter periods of time. The missionary pool was certainly enhanced with the graduates from the College of Medical Evangelists, now Loma Linda University School of Medicine. The number of graduates really took off in 1922. Among those graduates, on a passenger manifest that I found, sailing from Shanghai back to San Francisco at the end of his term, was a Donald Davenport, 35 years old, born in Stewart, Iowa. I've visited their Main Street. This is the passport photo, an earlier passport photo of Dr. Davenport and his son, Donald J. Davenport, graduate of CME in 1940. That Davenport name may ring a bell for other reasons. Leo and Jesse Hallowell were very active on a boat on the Amazon River. Here they are departing on a freighter for their service in the Amazon. I don't know who the other couple is. Missionary departures were very formal, so everyone was wearing a coat and tie, and even that persisted even into the 50s. Even in a suit and tie, he wore a skipper's cap. That was part of the image. And here he is in the water doing a baptism. There's another minister, a fair-haired minister, reading a scripture or something on the shore. And a child, not indigenous. Let's see how I try not to put too much animation into this. Uh, and he wrote a book about his experiences, Light in the Jungle. Do I? Oh, I have one of his passport applications. I'm not going to walk through this. I'll walk through another passport. He had separate photos for himself and his wife and child. And of course, uh, this book, edited by Richard out of Pacific Press, gives us a lot of images of missionary activity. And here are a group of natives looking at a picture roll. This is what we grew up with when I was in academy. This was the image of missionary activity. If an indigenous person made it to the general conference and dressed up like they were back in their previous life, it was very popular to see. General conference sessions often had this kind of back map with little lights showing where uh, where all the missionaries are active. But that also, entering every country, assumed a simple model of reality. For example, uh, the Bush administration after September 11 saw Iraq as a singular entity, a unified, homogeneous whole. But the political boundary of the map is misleading. That boundary was drawn arbitrarily by the British and the French at the end of World War I. And in reality, there are three very different cultures, religious groups coexisting, not always peacefully, in Iraq. And that is not always recognized when we just look at the colors on a world map. A good mission story. Uh, we grew up with mission stories. A good mission story describes primitive conditions, uh, be best in a jungle with a lot of danger and scary looking natives with spears and a snake in the rafters over the children's bed. That was a good mission story. And the definition of missionary is kind of interesting because the Adventist Church wasn't the only Protestant group doing mission service. Uh, One definition promotes a faith and performs ministry of service, including, get this, education, literacy, healthcare, social justice, and economic development. Well, we have the first three in our hip pocket. We do that without hesitation. But social justice and economic development, with few exceptions, was not on our agenda. There are examples. Fernando Stahl in South America alienated folk, the plantation owners, because he was seeking a better economic life for the natives. But that normally was not on our agenda. Okay, and that's a 1 hour topic. I'll have to mention my research has been all over the place. Uh, Wonderful resource in the General Conference website of denominational periodicals, about 1.5 million pages of material. The SDA yearbooks are all online. The statistical reports I use, the ancestry.com document database is so rich. It's spotty, but it's where it does cover. It's rich with all kinds of government documents. Okay, so that's the ancestry.com database I've been using for the last 7 years. Just an example on the database was a ship manifest, Strathnever, um, British. Well, is it a British ship? P&O must be British. Departing London for Bombay in 1938. This is a photo of the ship. This is the stern of the ship, and on that ship was the Keogh family, George Keogh, his wife, and a 4-month-old baby, Jillian Ann Keogh. They were sailing. They were going to uh, depart the ship at Port Said on the Suez Canal in Egypt. Now, Jillian was just 4 months old on this sailing, and she eventually grew up and married Larry Garrity. They met in Beirut. And when I showed this to her in a class a few years ago, she had never seen this document before. And of course, everyone in the class asked her how the food on the ship was, just 4 months old. Uh, in 1917, we were dividing the work into divisions of the General Conference. The Far Eastern Division headquarters was in Shanghai. There was union conferences around that, both North China and South China. Now, here's a little timeline of my estimation of the golden age of Adventist missions. And for reference, of course, we have World War I and World War II. Ellen White's life, she actually died in 1915, but she began to withdraw from active writing and influencing earlier than that. One of the factors was the rise of the North American division colleges that provided workers that were better educated. Of course, John Nevin Andrews left for Europe, the first Adventist missionary, back in 1874. But if I were to quantify the Adventist mission activity, it takes this shape. It took a dip during World War II, and it has faded away after 1950. Several reasons for that fade. Uh, we travel different. There was a rise of affordable air travel. Um, I'm going to move there. Uh, the decolonization and self-rule of much of the third world, and SDA leadership switching to local ministers as they became educated in the local area. But there was another factor was the decline in Adventist sense of urgency of the second coming. After 170 years, uh, that is not on everyone's mind, at least in the circles that I move in. Fortunately for me, the richest travel documents on all the databases covered from about 1915 through 1950. And that now another factor that enabled the Adventist mission movement was the colonial system and the economic strength of that colonial system. And that was kind of revealed in a speech that Winston Churchill gave in Parliament uh, with the threat of Nazi defeat of England. If England falls, the colonies will carry on the fight. So the English Empire was more than just England, it was the whole colonial network. Another factor that I can measure is the attention that the North American division gave to mission offerings. And what mission offerings superseded offerings for local church activities through the 20s and the 30s and through World War II. But then the emphasis changed, starting in the post-war economic boom in the United States. And there was a more attention to the quality of the church building, the local church building, and its monetary needs was much more visible than foreign missions. And so in the emphasis, and the metric is the offering to tithe ratio, really changed after 1950. The missionary departures to posts outside their divisions uh, peaked after World War II and has been relatively stable since then, as long until 1960, and then it started down again. As I mentioned, the British Empire facilitated, partly because we all speak English, uh, facilitated the spread of Adventist missions. The British Empire, of course, covering an awful lot of the Third World at the time. The French colonial empire was not so helpful, mainly because France was more of a Roman Catholic country. So uh, that did not facilitate French-speaking Adventists as much as English-speaking Adventists. And in fact, the French Empire shrank from time to time. There were metrics of denominational employment. The Pacific Union College yearbook tracked their graduates, those who were outside denominational employment, and those workers in the U.S. And then the slice up at the top, those graduates who were in the mission field. The General Conference tracked the percentage of graduates denominationally employed. And of course, that began to shrink as the student body grew and the number of the graduating classes grew. So that's my estimate in a quantitative way without reliable data of the growth and then the decline of mission activity. Bunch of topics we can't cover today. The independent ministries, and the scandals in the mission field, and family stress, embezzlement, mismanagement, misconduct regarding the youth, just misreading the market. And I've seen that so many times. Racism, elitism, um, gaming the financial system, and the concept, a pejorative term, rice Christians, people who join the Adventist church for their own personal career and economic benefit. Going to do a case study about Ezra Leon Longway, the first full-time missionary to Siam, at how it was named at the time. This is his passport photos. In the January 6 issue, 1919 of the Review, which had Woodrow Wilson on the cover. There are a number of American presidents on the covers of the Review. There was a concept of unentered fields. And in this little item, the number of unentered fields diminished. And of course, that is a count of whole countries, not parts of countries. And soon, with the arrival of brother and sister Ezra Longway in Siam, that country will need to be dropped from the unentered list. So they made a list of countries that they still had to go to. Well, Longways departed San Francisco, sailed on the SS China to Honolulu, to Manila, to Hong Kong, and Shanghai. They must have stayed in Shanghai for a certain amount of time and eventually sailed to Bangkok 68 days after leaving San Francisco. I suspect they were at the division office for some purpose. A different ship took them to Bangkok in Siam. Now we call it Thailand. Now, get a different perspective, looking at the SDA yearbooks, list of all the workers and all the institutions. They're all on PDFs on the web. And the 1920 yearbook is the first documented reference of Secretary Treasurer of the Siam mission, Ezra Longway. Now, apparently, F.A. Pratt was there before Longway, but he didn't get his ministerial degree. Pratt didn't get his ministerial degree until 1925 while he was on furlough. So we were sending missionaries out without ministerial degrees, which is a risk. But here in 38, he's in the publishing department of the China division. He was ordained in 1931. In 1972, he's still a field secretary of the Far Eastern Division of the General Conference. So he served, uh, Longway served in Siam, China, and the Far Eastern Division almost all of his career. I have a passport application. Back then, you didn't you if you were an American citizen and you were in a country and you needed to travel out of the country, you had to apply to either the embassy or the local consulate for a passport application. And this was usually an unexpected travel need called an emergency passport, issued in Bangkok on in 1921. He would be traveling with his wife, Inez Ruth Longway, and two minor children, Ava, Ruth, and Myrtle. He was born in Teresa, New York, Ezra Longway, the way up there in New York State. Uh, Born 1896. All this information are on these forms. His father was Henry D. Longway. I haven't chased any research that. The fee for the passport was $9, which is awfully steep given the cost of living back then. His legal domicile was Lancaster, Massachusetts. That should sound familiar to some of you. Originally left the U.S. in October 14 for the purpose of missionary work. That's interesting terminology. On behalf of the SDA Mission Board, Washington, D.C. He was going to be visiting the Straits settlements in French Indochina and China. Now, the Straits settlements is an archaic term for the British territories shown in red, Penang, Singapore, and two other coastal cities on the Malay Peninsula. This was the passport photo in 1921 with just one daughter, and that was Ava Ruth. A year later, there was a second child, and so there was Myrtle and Ava Ruth. Beautiful photographs, considering they're taken in Bangkok, and we actually have a birth record of Myrtle, born December 5, 1920. This is a form with the U.S. consulate, children born to American parents, and I'll really go through this fast. In Bangkok nursing home, the father's residence, the mother's name before marriage, mother's birthplace, again, Lancaster, Massachusetts, registration as an American citizen. The physician was a Dr. Seeley in the British dispensary in Bangkok. So again, the British colonial system facilitated the lives of missionaries. During World War II, Myrtle was a student at Atlantic Union College, and she was one of the Sabbath school officers. They moved to Hankow, China. Here's another passport photo of the family. That's where Hankow, China is. Another passport photo in 1924. And so with these passport photos available on the web, we can trace the development of some of these missionary families, which I think is pretty remarkable. Missionaries, the Caucasian missionaries generally had plenary responsibilities in the General Conference sessions. So they often had to sail back to the United States. There was a GC session in San Francisco in 1936, and we see on the ship manifest all these passengers on this ship. Their home domicile is listed on the right. You may recognize a number of these family names: Reebok, Scharpenberg, Appel, Harry Miller. Okay, so in May 1937, there was this GC session, and here they are, all delegates representing the China division. There are some indigenous folk, but most of those names are Anglo. That was still the situation in the 1930s. Delegates to the General Conference session. Well, with World War II, the Far Eastern Division headquarters had to move from Shanghai. It moved to Hong Kong for a while, and then it basically shut down during the Japanese occupation. The division published monthly at Far Eastern Division Outlook, and that publication just totally stopped during the Japanese occupation. So we don't have a whole lot of information about what was going on there.
Os
In
vídeos
December 12,
tinhas ligado o
1941,
vídeo e depois estava
the
com o vídeo ligado
the uh,
também.
the
Mas pronto, também não tinha
somebody
mal.
got unmuted here. They invaded the Philippines, and they also invaded Hong Kong. And so many European Adventist missionaries were put into prison camps. And there were several prison camps in the Philippines. Los Baños is the one I know the most about. They were there for 3 or more years, and in February 1945, the American Army 11th Airborne Division swooped down on the camp fast enough so that the Japanese prison guards could not respond, and picked up all the folk. And they had these tracked floatable vehicles that they came across the lake on, and took away all these Europeans. They're not just missionaries, but other Europeans that had the misfortune of being in Manila when the Japanese captured it. The Manila Free Philippines newspaper got published by February, uh, noting that 2,000 civilians were set free in that raid in Los Baños. By April 45, the Far Eastern Division Outlook was published again, and it gave us a list of the people who were there. On that list was a Mr. and Mrs. Mansell and their 2 sons, who were simply passing through the Orient en route to missionary activity in Africa. And they were caught up in the invasion, and they had to stay in the internment camp. Included in those were, of course, Paul Eldridge, later president of the Far Eastern Division, his wife, his daughter Norma, who I knew personally, and the Guthrie family, and of course, Mrs. E.L. Longway, Ralph Longway, and David Longway, her 2 sons. The girls were back in the States at this time. Ezra Longway was not in Manila at the time, so he was not captured. He worked in the free part of China much of the war, and so they were eventually released by the 11th Airborne Division. One of the internees was a physician with the last name of Honor. When he got back to the States, he had to register for the draft, just like all other males. And this is his draft registration, with the excuse for the delay, because most of these people registered in 1940, just released from Los Baños concentration camp, the Philippine Islands. And slowly they managed to come back to the U.S. Here is Richard Hamill. Some of you may be familiar with him. Came back on the SS Admiral Earl. And okay, the golden age of missionary activity had a certain mystique, and it was celebrated and honored, which is a good thing. I mentioned the 5 to 7 year tours, the urgency driven by last day theology, and the token entering versus market saturation. If you got one missionary in a very large country, that was enough to satisfy their formula of reaching the entire world. That doesn't make sense to me. And of course, focus on process rather than outcomes. And as Ron Lawson would uh, point out, focus on baptisms rather than long-term retention of the members in the church. And there was also in the mission field a two-tiered segregated education system. For example, the locals could not attend Far Eastern Academy or Vincent Hill School. Here's a photo of the mission compound in Shanghai. So what members know about the world church comes from their limited personal observations and what the church media tells us, which has a certain bias. The goal of the church media is to confirm our trust in leaders and our trust that we have the correct doctrine. That makes us feel good, and affirm our identity with the institutions that are successful. And that's a whole 1 hour topic. The communications of the church leadership and their journals and other media had certain themes of triumphalism and success. Very rarely did I find in print a confession that the evangelistic meetings weren't going well. There's one in Scotland, and no one was showing up, and they shut it down after a couple of weeks. But there is also mission hagiography. And there were a lot of books published with mission stories. If you go down into the La Sierra University Heritage Room, they have a rich collection of books, denominational publications, and publishing was big business for the church. And a lot of these are mission stories, both for adults and a lot of books for children. And so you have all these titles of stories in the mission field or on the frontier of Adventist work. Eric B. Hare not only wrote books, but did lectures and recordings, LP records of mission stories, very dramatic. And in the Book and Bible House, I'm using an archaic expression, forgive me. It's an Adventist book center. I'm an old guy, forgive me. And the one in Riverside was a shelf labeled with true stories. And I'm thinking, why do they have to say that these are true stories? Until Larry Garrity pointed out to me that there was another section just on fiction. And so the Book and Bible House was selling books, Christian fiction literature. But my goodness, what fiction are you going to talk about in the story of Noah? So there were some consequences of cultural imperialism, which went right along. Back in the day, the North American division had all the money, and it sends missionaries to foreign lands. The NAD was the prominent influence in the General Conference. Sabbath school offerings were always for foreign missions. The adjective foreign reflects a point of view that later changed to world missions. That enabled the GC to direct some of the Sabbath school offerings back to North American Division. In the Adventist Today issue, I guess this is the website, back in 2019, there was an article by Arthur Sibanda, and he quoted a child saying, "Daddy, was Jesus a white man?" And we're right up against cultural differences and a certain cultural imperialism. Missionary expression and images reflected the North American culture of white children living in suburbs, snow, cars, Western clothes. I could do a whole talk just on the imagery in the Review and Herald of what good Adventists should look like and behave like. Uh, the images of the mission field reflected dark-skinned natives, primitive huts. I've shown you some of those. Missionaries focused upon the surface issue rather than the deeper truths. And African tribal culture fosters respect for elders and tradition, and the changes that we brought sometimes induced fear. Of course, opposition to women leadership is a direct product of the traditional missionary-driven culture, but also the values of the local indigenous people and their culture. So Adventism is very diverse. How do we reconcile the vast differences between theology and doctrine, between authority and the exegesis of sources? How do we have great differences in polity, the treatment of women and discomforting minorities, of culture, liturgy and music, norms of behavior. These three can trigger strong emotions if you tamper with them. Members want comfort, not controversy. And I don't have all the answers, but crafting the questions clearly may help the discussion in some future ATSS session, perhaps. So, in conclusion, and I'm astonished I'm making it under an hour, back in 1944, the youth instructor ran a 2-page list, an honor roll of Seventh-day Adventist youth. Well, not all these people were youth who died in mission service or as a result of mission service. And this is a very sobering page. And just an example, 2 women died in Yunnan, China. These missionary wives were murdered in their homes while their husbands were away on an itinerary trip. So I wonder if we give enough recognition to the sacrifices and the risks that missionaries took in the past. So to review the factors enhancing the mission's golden age were the Adventist higher education system in North America, the stability, at least until after World War II, of the colonial empire, the urgent theology, and the generalization of skill requirements. As time progressed, missionaries had to have more specific skills and training. The factors diminishing the golden age was a slow shift in theology, mainly grassroots theology, the decline of the colonial powers, the emerging local indigenous leadership of institutions, that because they were better trained. There were all kinds of local colleges training local workers. They want to move up the hierarchy, professionalizations of job descriptions, and back in North America, the post-war internal focus on the importance of the local congregation as compared to the worldwide mission of warning the world. Big change after World War II. So missionaries were imperfect people. Their home-based cultural baggage often colored their perception and expectations of the indigenous people. The myths of mission experience were often wrong. In spite of cheap labor, like having a maid and a cook, they still endured loneliness from their home base. There was no Zoom or Skype or email. And in the home base, they were easily forgotten. They had to be entrepreneurs and problem solvers. And those are great stories. And there were unexpected challenges came from the rising local education and the understandable local desire to take over leadership positions. So some questions for discussion. The Q&A is my favorite part. What was the theology and worldview which drove missionaries to such sacrifice? Why is that worldview not more prevalent today? What points of naiveté prevailed in the 1920s and 1930s? What was the role of cultural imperialism, if it did exist? In what ways did missionaries feel superior? Oh, that's a delicate topic. What elements of the message are now considered most essential? And how is or should be Adventist mission activity be different from other Christian groups in country? Should we cooperate? Should we compete? Oh, that's another whole hour-long topic. So I'm going to drop my screen share, and I guess Lauren gets the first word.
No, I'm not going to give him the first word just yet.
Okay, excuse me.
That's okay. That's okay. My secret spies have already told me you announced to the group that I was older than you, which is true. So you'll have to be deferential to old age here, Michael.
Of course.
So I want to do something. I just very briefly, I would like to do something a little bit different in that if anyone here, we have close to 100 people, if anyone here ever served as a missionary, I would like you to raise your hand. I would like to, number one, okay, Patty, I see you raise your hand, but you're going to have to raise your electronic hand so I can do that. Because I would like to ask you to just say who you are and say where you served, if you would be willing to do that. So I'm going to acknowledge, first of all, Jerry, you weren't a missionary, were you? No, I didn't think so. Okay, I'm gonna come back to you, I promise. Okay, Julie Andrews, you're the first person that comes up. I'm asking you to unmute. Julie, did you serve? And can you say where and when?
I served as a student missionary for a year and a half.
That counts, for crying out loud.
And
okay.
I was in Korea.
Okay. And can you say a word, are you willing to, about what that experience was like for you?
Sure. But it's hard to put into words. The fellowship that I had with the other student missionaries was really amazing. And at working in the English school system there, the school would offer free English classes in the form of Bible studies. So if the students would come in and do a Bible study, then they got free language opportunity. Okay. But they were also enrolled as students for the English classes.
Okay.
It was, I don't know.
Well, it must have been
sometimes I felt that we were tricking them or forcing them into, oh, you have to go to a Bible study if you want to practice your English. But we did get to spend a lot of time with our students outside of the classroom. I mean, our students would invite us on outings and we would just hang out and talk. So that was great. That was really great.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I
Yeah.
see, Jerry, you've given me somebody's name and I'll find them. But in the meantime, let me come to Irma. Irma, I'm asking you to unmute and would you follow suit? Would you tell us where you served? Tell us your whole name and where you served.
Yes, my name is Irma Hartley. We served in sort of Central Africa, Uganda. We spent 6 years in Uganda and 4 years in Malawi, and then 7 years in Rhodesia, which then became Zimbabwe, and we had to leave because of the terrorist activity there.
Did you know my very dear friend Margot Reese in Zimbabwe?
No, I didn't. There were several missions in Zimbabwe. Well, Rhodesia is when we were there, and then it became Zimbabwe when we left because of terrorism.
I think she was there about that time, but yes, I'm sure it was diverse.
Yeah,
you spent that's like the better part of a career. That when you say we, you mean you and your husband?
yes.
Okay.
And our children were both born in Uganda. And yeah, it was all education because we were both teachers, and so we enjoyed teaching, but it was a very white superior kind of attitude that all the missionaries had, sadly.
Thank you for your candor. You're just confirming things that Michael has raised. I appreciate that. How wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate your being willing to speak to us about it. Patty, let me come to you. I've asked you to unmute. Patty, some reason you're not unmuted, Patty.
Okay.
There you go.
All
There you
right.
go.
Well, like Julie, I was a student missionary in Seoul, Korea. Spent a year there. And I was there from June of 1970 to July of 1971. So I guess a little more than a year cheating there. And I had, seriously, that was the best year of my life. It changed me completely. It showed me, number one, that I did not want to be a teacher. I was teaching English as a second language. And at that time, the director of our entire language system was Dean Hubbard, who just passed away about 3 months ago, I believe. But we did not trick people into coming. They paid for an English curriculum, English teaching curriculum, and we offered Bible studies as an option. So that's what I know from where I was at that time. We didn't have any of this, we're going to pull you in and make you sit through something you really don't want to do. But that's how it was when I was there. Mike's talking about the missionaries, and I'm thinking, I lived with one missionary family for 6 months and another one for 6 months. Curtis and Corrine King, he was the administrator of the hospital there in Seoul. And then the second 6 months was Robson and Isabel Newbold. He was the chief surgeon at the hospital. And I just had such wonderful memories of being in their homes with their families, finding a place of belonging and a feeling of belonging that I had not had anywhere else before. So I just have all these memories stirred up of those, you call them the golden days, and maybe 1970 was not part of the golden age, but it was for me a golden year. Just the best experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Patty. It's so interesting to hear about. Yvonne, let me come to you. I've asked you to unmute. You'll have to find your unmute. There you go.
I think I have unmuted now.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Okay. I too was a student missionary in the 60s in Ethiopia, in northern Ethiopia. I was supposed to teach, which I do. But I think it was a very educational year. I had my idea of mission totally changed. I had grown up with knowing a pioneer missionary to Cameroon and to Africa. And I thought my students should be grateful that they came. But, I was young and inexperienced as a teacher. And of course, they were like all other students everywhere when they get a young and inexperienced teacher, they try to put her in place, which they did quite a bit. So I promised myself I would never be a teacher after this. But yes, I did become a teacher eventually. So, but I admired my students because they were having their lessons in English, and their language was Amharic, and this was in the countryside, very isolated. There was an Adventist hospital with a Norwegian doctor, legendary Dr. Hoganvik, and his wife, and I shared with a Danish nurse, Else Chance. They were all fantastic people, and we could talk in between ourselves in our Scandinavian languages, which was a kind of a refuge. But I must say that I learned a lot about how it was in Bible times, because this was, very long time ago, and the people lived here in much as you meet in the Bible time. I remember especially when we foot washing and the Lord's Supper once a year at the conference. And, many of these people, rural people, they went barefoot and they had all kinds of infection in their feet. And I thought, how am I going to wash their feet? I might get these infections. I was really scared. But then the mission president, an Ethiopian mission president, his wife came to me and said, Miss Johansson, come, I will wash your feet. And she was a lovely woman. And I really learned what foot washing was there. It was a lesson I never, ever will forget. And yes, later on, my family, when I was married and had children, we were a short time in Liberia. And that was a total failure, because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. So I said some truths which had us to have to leave. So my African experiences was rather much a failure, but they were very, very much helpful for me for the rest of my life. And I have had 2 books written about Swedish missionaries, a biography of this woman I knew as a child in Cameroon in the 30s. And then I wrote about all the Swedish missionaries to foreign fields some years ago. And that was also a very interesting research to make. I had use of this experience for the rest of my life, but it was tough. Yes. I tell you, it was tough.
Yes.
I felt so much failure.
Thank you for your...
So that was Africa to me.
Thank you for your authenticity, for being so honest with us. I appreciate that. I'm grateful for that. Now, I don't see this person, but I have unmuted. Bernie, your phone is unmuted. So can you speak? I was asked to give you an opportunity.
Is my video on?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm not looking in the right.
Okay. Well,
there you are. I see you now. All right. Yes. Okay. Please tell.
I grew up on these missionary stories. I loved going to the special MV meetings that we had with the missionaries coming and telling us all these wonderful stories. And so I had always wanted to go to Africa. That was, I just loved the whole idea of going there. And so when they called my husband to go, this was in the early 90s, I didn't tell him that I had always wanted to go to Africa. We went to Kenya, and so I said it was, since he was the one they were calling, they wanted him to go over and help set up a department at the University of Eastern Africa, Industrial Technology Department. And so I said, they're calling you, you make the decision. I will go with whatever decision you want. And of course I was thrilled when he thought, sure, we'll go, we will do this. But then we were in the process of adopting a child from Guatemala. So the conference said, that's okay, we'll wait till you can go. And till when you get the child, we'll send you over. Well, then they told us that we were not getting the child. So then the conference got ready to send us over. And then we got a call from Guatemala and they said, hey, your baby is ready. Can you come and get him? So then the general conferences said, okay, we will wait because we really need your husband to be at University of Eastern Africa. So we waited, and then they, of course, said that we had to wait a certain amount of time here in the States before we could take the child out of this country. And then found out I was pregnant. So that was another, because I was an older mother, they wouldn't let me go and have the child. So within 10 months, though, we had 2 new babies and we moved to Kenya, East Africa. And it was not what I thought it was going to be. They weren't exactly happy that we were coming, and I'm not sure at the time, I didn't know why, but there were a lot of politics going on, which I guess this was in the 90s. Finally, they got things straightened out. Jeff did his job. And then as I got to know the people, the nationals, they were so lovely. I loved it. I just loved living there. I really did. It was beautiful. The people were so friendly. And God seemed to me to be much more present, and the Holy Spirit much more present as I was there with these people, because they weren't burdened down with all the craziness that we have here in this country. We're always in such a hurry to get everything done. So to me, I guess what I'm saying is that it was a changing experience for me personally to go there. Had I not, I may not have developed the faith that I have now, because, as you're going there as a new mother, no support, because you don't know anyone, and your husband is gone all the time because he had a job to do there, and he did a good job, and it turned out well. But as the wife, it was difficult. But one day, I just have to tell you this story, is that I was sitting in a chair there just crying with this baby in my arms and the other one sitting next to me. And I was just, wow, I just don't know what to do here anymore. And the presence of the Lord was so vivid, so real to me, that I felt I could reach out and touch him. It just gave me such a lift, inspiration. The rest of from there on, life changed for me there. I just thought, I'll make it the best, because I know I'm not alone, really. And I'm just glad that we had that experience.
What a remarkable experience, and what tenacity. I can't imagine going with 2 tiny little babies. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Russ, I think you're unmuted already. Share.
Yes, I wanted to thank Michael for this excellent piece of history and the stories that he told. I grew up on Eric B. Hare's stories as well, as many of you, and thought I would like to go to the mission field someday. And so I had a chance to teach at the Christian Studies Department at our school in Japan Missionary College, or Saniku Gakuen, as they called it, for 3 years. And this was, of course, in the early 70s. And so beyond the time period that Michael emphasized, and quite a different situation, I would say, in Japan, of course, because I had to teach through a translator. We didn't have time to learn the languages, but we did go to language school for many sessions, of course, and yet the translator that I used primarily had the same degree I had from Andrews University. He could easily have taught the class himself. And I think, of course, shortly after we left, that became the pattern at a school like Sani Kagakwan. So that was our experience. We enjoyed it very much. The country was great for us to experience, and the people of also. But I actually did write the Far Eastern Division at the time and explain the situation. And we did not stay the full 5 years. We came back after 3 for some of those reasons. And I'll just add that to the experience. I'm looking forward to the discussion to follow.
Yes, indeed. We're getting there. And thank you. Thank you, Russ, for sharing your experience. Boy, Michael, we're getting a lot of candor and, nuances underneath the surface as a result of this. Debbie,
Linda, Debbie Isley wanted to speak, but she didn't know how to raise her hand.
well, I've asked her to unmute. I've been clicking on unmute. So
Oh.
Debbie, wherever you are,
She may have stepped away.
Hello. Hello.
There you go.
Hi, it's all right. Everybody's got a long story to tell, and I wrote mine in the chat, so you can read it there later. No problem. But I'm excited to hear some of you were influenced by Eric B. Hare. He was my grandpa, and he raised me. So yes, he gave me that desire to be a missionary too. Now I'm going to mute myself. Bye.
bye. Thank you, Debbie. Okay, let me see here. I'm coming to Brendan. Let me get up here and ask you to unmute. Sorry, my cursor. Oh, you're unmuted.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I am. Now I'll unvideo.
There you are.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. Well, my story is completely different, and maybe I should keep it to myself. But I grew up on Leo B. Hallowell's book, and I knew when I was 11 that I was going to be a missionary doctor. It always amazed me that none of my friends knew what they were going to do, because I knew when I was 11. So I went through the system to Walla Walla and then to Loma Linda, and I signed up for a deferred mission appointment. And it was kind of late in the time for the church to be doing this, because they would pay for your full medical school if you signed up for missions. They don't do that anymore, I believe.
It's called a deferred appointment.
Pardon?
It's called a deferred appointment. I think they still do it.
Yeah, I would be surprised if they paid the whole. Anyway.
That could be, yeah.
So it was in my freshman year there, and one of my friends and I were both signed up, and he went, and he was single and I was single. And he was told that because he was single, he only had to go for 2 years to Guam and to come back every 6 months for some time, presumably to meet somebody and get married. And then it was my turn, and they were going to send me to Malawi for 6 years with one return at 3 years. And we were, both the same financial situation. So I thought, I wanted to go to Africa. That sounded okay. He and I talked it over, and I knew it didn't sound right. And I was talking to one of my friends' house guests, was an African-American general conference leader. And I told him the story. And he said, he got mad. He said, do not do it. He says they treat women like they treat Black people, and they will let you rot. So I didn't. And, that's always what I wanted to do. I got to go with the heart team to Vietnam, and I got to go with the Loma Linda group to a refugee camp in Thailand. And through the university in Minnesota, I got to go to Africa. But I never got, my childhood dream. And, it was clear. It was in 1971. So
Mhm.
they were it was just the beginning of women's
Mhm.
being noticed in the church. I mean, they're still getting paid a lot less. They probably still are. And all that. And this man that I talked to, he was so angry. He said, just don't do it. So I didn't.
What a remarkable insight. I have to tell you, I understand. I should raise my hand because I was, in fact, with my then husband, a missionary, if you can call it that, and I've mentioned this before, at the Holbrook Indian Mission, which is a North American mission by definition. And it was at the same time, Brenda. And the reason I mention it now, just to add myself into the esteemed ranks of those of you who have shared your experience, that I refused to work for the school. I was there and did a lot as, the wife of a teacher and the dean, but I worked at the public school because they wouldn't pay me. It was just terrible. But they paid women in 1971. And I really resonated with Yvonne, who said she opened her mouth, because that's how come we were only there 2 years, because I reported the principal to the sheriff because he had a dog that kept biting and injuring people. And we were asked to leave after that. So I'm highly sympathetic about speaking up and what that can do. But Brenda, I'm so grateful that you shared your experience. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I didn't know if it was appropriate, but
Absolutely.
it changed my life. And that was sad because that's all I ever wanted to do.
Absolutely. This is such a good thing that we're doing here, I think. It is for me anyway. So Linda, I come to you and ask you to unmute and share your experience.
I've got a pressing question. Thank you, Michael. From
No,
the
Linda, excuse me. We're just not quite done with the people who have served in the mission. Did you serve?
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Well, then keep your hand up and I'll come to you. I've just got a couple of others in line in front of you. So we're going to do that. Don't go away. Don't take your hand down. I'm going to come to you. All right. Well, I think others in the chat have also served. But I have to ask Michael. Michael, what are your impressions having heard the things that these people had to say, and how does it relate to your presentation? What do you make of this?
Perhaps I didn't spend time giving the broader context of what the Adventist culture and employment was like, and the treatment of women. I'm so glad you brought that up. And quite frankly, I was very cautious about telling any negative stories because I have to be very sure of the facts if I'm going to tell those. But a lot, I gave one slide that showed a number of things that could go wrong, and a lot of things went wrong, and we don't know about all of them. We heard a couple here, and I think in about the late 1970s, 1980s, the church became a lot more mature in how it screened candidates, how it matched them with the needs, and how it trained them. There became a like a foreign service school in the State Department. There was a training program, I think, at Andrews, to really enable the people who are departing for the foreign missions, to be much more mature in what they expect, and to navigate it much better. But these stories do not surprise me. I just didn't feel it was appropriate to talk about them very much.
But I think that for someone like me who's been an Adventist a really long time, except for what I've described, I didn't go overseas to mission, but serving as a missionary was sort of like a phantasmagorical thing to do. I had a relative by marriage who did go to Africa, principally because she would have servants, and it sort of completed her victimization persona anyway. But the stories of motivation and the people that have shared their experiences here are very different. It's not a glassy-eyed thing. It's real world acumen and thought and consideration. I'm impressed by it. So let me come to that. We've now achieved our normal order. I've got Lauren who's going to come first, and then Jerry, you're next.
Well, my first thing to do is to let you know that next week we have an Adventist scholar named Don McAdams. And some of you knew Don. He was the college president back in Southwestern, I believe, maybe, Michael. I think
Yes, it
that's
was.
where he was. He was at Southwestern. He's going to be talking about the revisionist studies of Ellen White since 1970. That I'm really interested in that. I think it'll be very good. Michael or Don, rather, has he kind of took a tour out of the church for a while, and I wouldn't say he's still a Seventh Adventist, but he is very much a Seventh Adventist scholar again, and digging right in deep onto some of the studies that he started. He was one of the first to write a sort of a parallel version between Ellen White and some of the books that she took that she copied from. And Fred Veltman followed up on that with a different book. And so this should be very interesting. I'm just really pleased that Don is willing to come back and speak to our group. We such a variety of people. Brenda's story made me think, Michael, of some of the stories I heard recently that are not nearly as cheery as the ones that I've heard from some of you today. Mostly having to do with Adventist frontier missions. Some old friends of mine retired and always wanted to go to the mission fields, ended up in Africa. And honestly, Michael, they never nearly killed those old people. And I called them the old people because they were about my age when they went out there. And really, I mean, they just took advantage of them. They just, they didn't have even though they'd gone through the training and everything. And I've got a couple of other families that should never have been sent overseas. They had divorces overseas. They had massive family problems. And I'm have to say honestly, I'm not a big fan of Adventist Frontier Mission anymore because of that. I think they are doing what you mentioned at the beginning, and that is they're going through the motions of doing things that seem to be important to Adventists, but I don't think they're doing it well. So
They're doing their duty.
their duty, and people get excited about it, and they send the money. I have
Yeah.
seen nothing come out of this, seriously, except
Yeah.
break. But let me add just one more thing here, Michael, that you didn't mention, but I found it interesting. When I first started ministry, this was back in the mid to late 70s. Carmen and I entered ministry, and I remember sitting around with some administrators one time having a talk, and one of the conference presidents said, "And then there's the problem of the returned missionary." And I had never thought of that. Missionaries had been huge in my upbringing. I credit the that went on to higher education with the fact that I went to Adventist schools where missionaries came and unrolled the python skin across the front of the stage and had 6 children holding it up and told his dramatic story of how he killed the python and skinned it and brought it back, and just one dramatic story after the other. I thought returned missionaries were the greatest heroes of the church. And here this guy is saying the problem of the returned missionary. And so I perked up my ears, and I may even have asked a question, even though I was very young. I said, "What do you mean the problem of?" He said, "These people come back, They don't have any current skills, even no, he wasn't talking about physicians, by the way. He was talking about
Yeah.
teachers and people who ran the press and
Mhm.
people who went overseas as evangelists. He said they really don't have skills that are current here. They don't have any money to start out with, really. They come back, they're dirt poor. They think they're the greatest thing that ever happened because they've been missionaries. And we stick them somewhere and it often doesn't turn out very well. And they're disappointed because they came back from being the high and mighty missionary, and we stick them in a three-church district in the Midwest, and they're not happy there. And some of them just flat out fail coming back from the mission field. They don't know what to do. They've got no money. They can't send their kids to school. They're just, and basically he said, return missionaries are not always, but very often duds.
And they don't have any home equity.
No home equity. Yeah. They come back at 40 years old. They have nothing. They have no savings. They have nothing. So I don't know if you've thought much
I'm
about that, but that was like a eye-opening to me. I had
I,
no
I'm
idea. And
I'm
this was
glad you brought
long
that up.
after
Yeah,
the era when they were heroes, apparently.
I'm glad you brought that up. Um, uh, because this is on the edge of another interest of mine, which I kind of alluded to in the attention economy a few weeks ago, and that is situational awareness or reading the room or reading the culture. I forget
Mhm.
where I was when I was at a professional meeting when uh, a speaker said, "You've got to go to Kuala Lumpur. It's the capital of or the largest city in Malaysia, and you've got to see how technically and economically advanced that place is, and that includes their healthcare system." And so uh, the notion that we're the only doctor in town may have been true in 1910, but it is not true today. And so the context, the economic and cultural context of where we think we're going to go has to be considered, and that has changed so much after World War II.
Yeah. Well, I was shocked to learn that returned missionaries were not automatically heroes.
Well, okay, they I don't want to diminish their sacrifice,
Right.
but they need to understand that the world has changed while they were gone,
Hmm.
or their home base culture has
Yeah.
changed.
Thank you.
Linda?
Yes, absolutely. Let me come to my good buddy, Jerry Lofthouse. Oh, Jerry, let me ask you to unmute. Are you in a cave somewhere, Jerry? Or are you at home?
No, I'm in my wife's childhood home, which she has now inherited, and we are spending 2 weeks out here, sort of re-nesting, and it's delightful. It's in north central Washington, and
Oh,
I'm sitting in our living room.
oh, we just have the lights off, I guess. Well, anyway,
Yes, I do.
please give Elaine my best. And so what are you thinking about with this whole discussion?
Yeah, this is a deep one. Michael, I wanted to bring up an aspect that we really haven't touched, but my wife and I and friends and family were having a discussion the other day about the place of missionaries and missionaryhood in our family. Um, my mom and dad really were not as proud of me as they would have been had I been a missionary. And I was aware of this. My cousin Bob Roberts, who married Jan, and they had 3 kids. They served in the mission field, and they were venerated in my family and still are. He died in a tragic plane accident a number of years ago. His two sons are mission pilots even now. His daughter is the youngest, is Stephanie, is a missionary. Um, it, I felt that I needed to be a missionary to succeed. Now, my parents allowed me some degree of approval by sort of the default of becoming a doctor. That was close, but it would have been so much better had I been a missionary too.
Yeah.
I almost, during college, my wife and I seriously considered being student missionaries for a year in Alaska. We went to all the classes. We met a lot of kids who went. We chose in the end not to. I went to Loma Linda. I haven't been a missionary since, other than a mission trip or two with youth. But even as a child, I vividly recall at State Line Adventist Church a call for donations to the Korean mission kids. And it was right after Christmas. I had a stuffed toy horse named Horace, whom I sent to Korea. I put him in a box and I very tangibly donated him to Korea. So I have no idea how well he served, but he was my surrogate. Um, yeah, what about this missionhood being so huge? Uh, I'm still not the success I could have been had I been a missionary. Michael, what is this?
No. I suspect you don't have the self-esteem you could have had you been a missionary.
Well, I'm sure that's true too.
Okay. Um, this is on the edge of another topic interest of mine, and that is the scripts that we are taught.
Oh, yeah.
The mission stories are scripts about other people, but we are also taught uh, scripts about who we are, how we behave, and some of the scripts are handed down by parents. I've seen students here at the university who don't want to be doing what they're doing, but their parents pushed them into it.
Ah, yes.
And I've got to wonder if that is behind some mission appointments. That this is my duty. I don't really want to do it. I have two friends, both became ministers. Their parents pushed them into it. Eventually, they bailed. One became a psychologist, and the other became a physician. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
over time, becoming true to who they were.
Yeah.
And so, but the other thing that I need to stress again is that uh, the 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 world, the culture, and the economy, and that includes education and healthcare of the third world, has changed drastically since World War II, and the old images don't apply anymore.
Yeah. I remember vividly still trying, I think, to measure up. I was called upon to write a chapter in a sports medicine book about bicycle injuries. And I put Gary, the son of my cousin Bob, in because he impaled his abdomen falling on a bicycle handlebar in Africa and survived. I mean, so these things go way back.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Let me come to Doreen. We're glad you're here, and I've asked you to unmute.
Okay.
Please.
Yes, I did. Thank you. My experience first was, I don't know if the church still has what's called an AVSC, Adventist Service Volunteer Corps. Basically, that's a step beyond the student missionary. So after you've graduated, you can take a year or more and be a so-called volunteer missionary. So my first experience was going to Cameroon as that kind of missionary. And then in later years, after I got married and started a family, we went to Kenya. Now, back to the AVSC, my motivation as a Black Canadian from French-speaking Canada was to go to a country that speaks French, but also as a fourth generation Adventist growing up with all these mission stories of white missionaries going to Black countries, I wanted to reverse that narrative. And it was a very interesting, I think I'll put both of those experiences, the AVSC, the volunteer missionary, and then the GC missionary, as I'll borrow from literature, and I'll say it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Interestingly, when I arrived, even though for weeks or months of preparation, everybody knew that I was coming, that I was a Black missionary, I arrived at the airport, and the resident missionaries, a couple, French and American, came to meet me with their worker, who was, interestingly at that time, it was men who served in the homes as domestic servants in all capacities, because they protected their women. Their women stayed at home. So anyway, they came with this person, and from the airport, we'd gone and done shopping and everything. And so by the time we were heading home, it was almost, late evening. And after all that time, we'd been on the road for 2-3 hours after the airport. And suddenly, the so-called worker turned to the resident missionaries and said, where is the missionary we're supposed to pick up? It just didn't occur to him that a Black person and a young Black woman would have been the missionary.
What country was this?
Sorry?
What country was this?
Cameroon.
Thank you.
Yes. And that being said, I had very wonderful experiences. That's why I refer to it as the best of times, the worst of times. Some of them were harrowing as well. I remember the missionary house burnt to the ground because there was no there was no fire brigade or anything nearby. And it happened to be an evening when they were out of town and left their children with me. So I had charge of these 4 children with the house burning to the ground. And, it was a good ending. Nobody got hurt, but the house was burnt. And it was a frightening experience. And especially for the parents who were out of town and having to, come back to this kind of thing. But part of the worst part was learning some of the hidden administrative perks and discriminatory practices that, unfortunately, I'm speaking in-house here, that happened at that time. And so it was an eye-opener for me. And I thought it was just a glitch of that area, but I found it to persist in my subsequent missionary experience as well. So that was unfortunate. But one last thing that I just want to point out is that, going to a different culture, I think I was fully prepared that it would be a different culture. And so I didn't have that hard a time fitting in or adjusting. However, from my first experience going that 1 year in Cameroon, when I came back, I had a shaky period readjusting to life back here, because I got accustomed to a simpler way of living. If I went shopping and I wanted an apple, if there were apples, which didn't grow there, then I could purchase an apple. But when I came back and I went to the supermarket and I wanted an apple, it was so overwhelming I didn't know what kind. There were just so many varieties of apples that I never thought of before. I just knew I liked, X, Y, or Z. But when I got back, it was just, I'd make several trips either to a store or to a supermarket, and I just go back home because I couldn't decide. It was just too overwhelming. So thank you for having me share.
Oh, how much we appreciate that. I can't imagine the cultural impact of being a Black woman and going overseas to serve in that capacity. I'm just grateful that you chose to share your experience with us, Doreen. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Linda, let me come to you. And you have a question, I think. Linda, there you go.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Michael. Doreen, thank you, because you kind of preface. I didn't know, that what I'm about to say would be, but thank you, Doreen, for breaking the ice. And you can see I'm African American. Um, I have a compelling question, but I'm going to preface it with this. I've studied some Black religions, religious African Black religion. And these weren't the savages that I was taught they were when I was younger. In fact, when biblically, I think it was Philip who witnessed to the Ethiopian and baptized him. And this Ethiopian went back. I think he was Candace's treasure. So he went back to Africa, and he carried some of that gospel. Okay, my question is, it seems like the white man is the benchmark going to Black Africa. And I don't mean this to hurt anybody or anything, because I appreciate the people experience that wanted to go to Africa to help these poor African people. Even though I've learned since then that they weren't all savages. They knew the gospel. A lot of them knew the gospel. What I want to know is, are there Black people that were encouraged to go to white countries, like, I don't know, Sweden, Norway, whatever, to where they were the benchmark? In that, I'm talking about Adventists now, not, the whole wide world of Christianity. So let me get your take on that, Michael. Thank you.
I recall Gottfried Oosterwald, who wrote a book on mission service, at least one book. He was at the seminary in Andrews. He talked about the very kind of reverse migration that you were describing. And my feeling is you don't want to become a missionary from a sense of duty. You want to make things better, and you want to make people's lives better. The gospel has the potential for bringing peace to people's lives. The gospel, as it is packaged in a faith of legalism and duty and judgmentalism, does not necessarily make people's lives better. Yet that was the faith or the religion that many people felt it was their duty to take to some other place. And so the criteria for me is, if we're going to do something, does it have the potential to make their lives truly better? I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that is a concern of mine. So anyway, I'll let it sit at that.
Linda, it's a very provocative question, sort of having to do with the stereotypical idea of what and who a missionary is. And Michael, you briefly alluded to Ferdinand and Anna Stahl, and I know a little bit about that. And they were self-supporting missionaries of German extract, I think, if memory serves me, and went down to Peru, to the Altiplano. And and you alluded to this, that they found themselves in great disfavor with the rich landowners because their principal approach to missionary activity was to teach the indigenous people how to read. And once they knew how to read, then they were no longer in such a disenfranchised position as they had been up until that point in time. And because of the disaffection of the wealthy landed folk there, Mr. Missionary Stahl, when he rode his horse and went where he needed to go, he was packing. He had a gun.
I think David Trim showed us a photo of
he had a gun.
him with
yes.
a weapon on his hip.
Yep, that's right. That's right. So he had a very practical viewpoint about missionary activity and what he was willing to contribute.
He took risks. He thought outside the box. But let's face it, literacy and education has consequences, sometimes unintended consequences. And that's the risk we have to take.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Ed, I'm glad to thank you, Michael. Ed, I'm glad to see you here today. I've asked you to unmute. There you go. So what are your thoughts?
I have a question for Michael. First of all, I haven't known that many people who went on missionary trips, but I've known a lot of people who went on ADRA trips, as employees of ADRA. And generally speaking, they seem to have a positive experience. And I don't know about both partners, but anyways, one of them seemed to have gotten equivalent Canadian salaries and so forth. So my question for you, Michael, is how do you compare ADRA employees or experiences with missionary ones?
I haven't talked to many ADRA people. You're on the edge of another delicate topic, and that's compensation for people, and you will have in an Adventist institution, particularly in a mission setting where two people doing the exact same job have very different compensation structures. One indigenous and one a U.S. based missionary. I should also say that I was told that, and it's the General Conference Secretariat that does a lot of these coordination and placement of missionaries, but they would send a single woman to a mission field, but not a single man, and I can understand why that is. But that's a whole area. It requires a lot of data. I just skimmed the surface of the whole mission topic. There's so many avenues I didn't go down. One is the compensation, the financial compensation, how they're treated in non-monetary benefits, the subsidies for housing and children and education and things like that. It's very complicated, and it changed over time. I will say, I mean, I need to go back and see what was John Nevin Andrews, who went to Europe, the first missionary. What was his compensation package like, and what happened if and when he came back? That would be worth looking into. Yes, the disparity in compensation. And that's not just a mission problem. That happened at Pacific Press, and that's happened all over North America, the discrimination against women. So we're on the edge of I'm an old guy. I won't live long enough to totally explore and research that. I've said before there ought to be a thorough research into the economics of the institutional Adventist church. I think it would be very interesting, but I'm not up to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ed. But you know, Ed's question is provocative because I really wonder if we took a poll, and I won't do that, if many of us, if not most of us, feel like whatever mission means today, it probably is something different than what it was starting. And if that's true, then it makes you wonder, well, what is the difference? What should it be? And it makes me wonder, is ADRA the model for what mission ought to be? Or is it an infrastructure that could be added to, because it's been principally defunded, you understand, for those of you that don't know. I was shocked to learn, as I've mentioned previously, that I never knew until recently that nearly 70% of ADRA's funding came from the U.S. federal government. And that's gone now, gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone, unless some lawsuits are prevail. And we just don't really know how that will be. And so it makes you wonder what, maybe that's where our efforts need to be redirected. But Michael, the one question I would ask is there anything, well, let me say this. It was either you or someone else that gave a presentation. And if memory serves me, there were only several hundred active missionaries from North American Division in the world anywhere today. I mean, it's a fairly small number. Is my recollection about that pretty accurate or no?
That wasn't me.
It wasn't you. It was somebody else.
Me.
Somebody else who told us that. But let's just assume for a minute it's true. Is there any active consideration or contemplation at the institutional church level about what mission should be, other than just what we have done?
Well, that's a fundamental question, a preamble to all the rest of this discussion, is what does the Adventist church or the Adventist church invisible, let alone institutional implementation, what is your message and what do you want to accomplish? And divorce that from traditional processes and talk about outcomes. That's the big question that we should be wrestling with prior to specific implementation in education and healthcare and mission activity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking a risk in challenging that.
Stated very diplomatically, I must say. And I lost my gentleman. Where did he go? My gentleman from Germany. I went to unmute you and now you're gone. Perhaps he will come back.
We're pushing the time limit here.
Well, there you are. There you are. Thomas, there you are.
Yes, hello. Hello from Germany.
Hello.
I'm connected familiar to Kenya for the last 25 years. My wife is Kenyan. And so I have, up the last 25 years, I have good connections to Kenyan different SDA churches and pastors and church workers. And in my opinion, we don't need missionaries, the old style missionaries. We don't need it anymore. The Adventist theology and the Christian theology is well known in Africa. I can speak only for Kenya and East Africa. We have a lot of well-known and high educated pastors and church workers there. They need people like Maranatha teams, ADRA teams, maybe doctors, medical educations. but not theologians, missionaries.
Evangelists?
Mhm.
Do they need evangelists?
No, I don't know. Maybe we in
Okay.
Europe, in Europe, especially here in Germany, we need African theologians, missionaries right now.
You're hinting at a radical paradigm shift in what the Adventist church should be doing.
Yes, I would say they know the Adventist theology very well, and it's not necessary to send missionaries to Kenya or to Africa.
Okay.
But Thomas, let me, if I can, just forgive me, Michael, interject. Jerry Lofthouse, who spoke a little bit ago, has put in the chat something, and let me ask you about this, Thomas. Jerry says, while it's no longer shared exclusively within Adventism, the character of God would seem to be an urgent, current topic for mission. What do you think about that? Oh, Tom, oh, you're muted again. Thomas, there, I've asked you to unmute. What do you think about that, the character of God?
Okay, so, yeah, I think we have different cultures, and I think it's probably difficult to teach the European or the North American style of believing or religion to these people in Africa right now, because they are also high educated, and they have their own culture and their own style of religion and belief. It's not similar to ours, yeah.
And access to the internet. Access to the internet.
Yeah, yeah. And I see we are very close, yeah, in our Adventist belief. No question, yeah. We are a church, world church. But there are some differences between our cultures. The African people live other life than we in Western Europe or in Northern America.
See,
and
that's back to reading the audience, reading the market, reading the room.
yes,
exactly. Thank you, Thomas. Lauren, your hand is up.
Yeah. Again, let me remind you that I have Dr. Don McAdams coming next week talking about revisionist history of Ellen White. So spread that around. I think this should be, I want to give him a good attendance because he hasn't spoken at Adventist audiences for many years, and he's a great scholar. So I'm looking forward to that. Michael, this has been fascinating. I wanted to pursue with you just a little bit this notion of you got into it a bit, this idea of we have to convert the whole world. If we don't go there and tell them, then what's going to happen to them? That sort of idea. I've heard that all my life, and I never really buckled down and defined it till a few years ago. I was sitting in a big North American division meeting, and a guy got up and said, so let's suppose we send out literature and 300,000 people hear our message. And then he went on and said, now suppose 10,000 of them actually would become Seventh-day Adventists. And then he said, well, no, I'm sorry. I was telling the story wrong.
Yeah, but we've had this conversation before.
Yeah, he said, suppose we send out our literature and 100,000 people hear our message. That still leaves, and then he estimated the number of people in the United States. That still leaves that many people that we have left to reach. And I thought this was very interesting. He was basically subtracting the people who had been reached from the total that we have left to reach. In other words, having sent out the message and given them the opportunity, not our problem anymore.
Yeah, I'm good. Watch my body language. Jesus is coming. You've been warned.
You've been warned.
Mhm.
We have taken, I call it the taking away your excuse version
There
of
you go.
evangelism.
There you go.
And I've had church members tell me the same thing. We said, okay, we sent our brochures to everybody in this town. They could have looked at them and come to our meetings.
Yeah.
They did not. Not our problem anymore.
Our duty is done.
Our duty is done.
Yep.
And when I was a young pastor, they had hanging in the conference office a map of North Dakota. That was where I was at the time. And this map of North Dakota was a county map.
Do they
There
color
were
in the
little
counties?
pins on it.
Yeah.
And so every county, and it was, and they had a sign at the top. They said the dark county map of North Dakota.
Yeah, we had
Which
that
is-
in
And they
Texas.
actually had
Yeah.
colored in with a different color every county that did not have a pin in it.
Mhm.
And those were dark counties. There was no light of Jesus in Butte
Right.
County, North Dakota, because there was not a church there.
Ignoring the fact that a county and its boundary is totally an artificial construct based on government.
And ignoring that there was a Lutheran church there and a Presbyterian church and a Baptist church.
Well, that too. Yeah.
That didn't really matter. It was dark of the light of Jesus. I find it offensive now, but that's kind of goes along with the idea that you said we sent a missionary to that country that takes care of our responsibility.
Yeah, I had more slides on that, but I wanted to keep it shorter.
Yeah,
I have
no,
another appointment to go to, so
it's astonishing. We'll let you go since you have other things to do. But there's so much about this that needs to be explored, and perhaps we can do it another time.